I'm in my last year of high school now, and this happened on Halloween night of last year. Me and my friends were too old for trick-or-treating, and we were too young to drink and party. That's why we decided to go and explore an abandoned house that was near our school. Everyone knew about the place, because it was just off a pretty major road in our town. I don't really believe in ghosts, but if I did, then this place was a textbook example of a haunted house. It had wooden siding and window shutters that were painted white, but they were really old and dirty. The roof was brown shingles, and almost half of them were probably missing. After school, we all met at my friend Jay's house, because it was the closest. I brought my flashlight and a spare that I gave to my friend Ben. It was just the three of us, and we headed over there once it was kind of dark. When the house came into view, it was every bit as creepy as I remembered. The faint glow from the moon and the distant streetlights made the place look straight out of a horror movie. It was just what we were looking for. Even still, I was getting a little scared as we approached the back. We knew that the back door was opened, because we'd looked around that place before, but we had never been inside. I'm sure it was supposed to be sealed, but someone else must have broken it down. I went in first, and then the others followed. Broken glass and other debris crunched under our feet as we walked in. The place was an absolute disaster. Everything was either broken or missing. The only furniture was a smashed coffee table in the middle of the room. The kitchen was almost completely gutted, with no appliances, and even the countertops were missing. I had no idea if it was picked over by looters, or if the owners salvaged what they could. We didn't care at the time. It was just interesting to see. Next, we heard a noise from the other side of the house. It was like a creak in the floorboard, or maybe a door. I was startled, but not that scared. We made our way down the hall. There was another room on the ground floor, and it seemed like that's where the noise came from. It might have been a bedroom or an office, and we thought we'd check it out. As we walked down the hallway, we took time to check out some of the graffiti. It was clear that we were not the first ones there. We knew it was a popular spot for other kids. When we got to the room, I poked my head around the corner. There was no door. As soon as I looked in, it seemed much like the rest of the house. Garbage everywhere, graffiti, and no furniture. There was no sign of anything that could have made the noise, so we walked in to look around some more. As soon as we were in, I heard the noise again. I turned around and saw a man standing in the corner facing the wall. We never saw his face, but he had long gray hair. We could also tell that he was wearing a mask, probably a cheap plastic clown mask. I jumped and yelled some curse words instinctively. My two friends saw him too, and did the same. As soon as we came to our senses, the three of us bolted out of there. We made it to the back door and out to the street. Once we were out, we went across the street to catch our breath. When we looked back to the house, I saw a man in a clown mask poke his head out from around the corner. He didn't chase us anymore, and we soon got out of there. We went back to Jay's house to play some video games and talk about the night. For the rest of the evening, we discussed what happened, but we still have no idea what that guy was doing in there alone, or if he was actually dangerous. This happened on Halloween night 5 years ago. I was 23 at the time, and I had just moved to my house. It was a single story with 2 bedrooms and an unfinished basement. I was renting the second room to my friend Joseph, who I knew from college. I was pretty excited to have my own place, and I wanted to be a good neighbor, so I thought it was important to stay in and give out candy to the neighborhood kids. Joseph went out to a Halloween party, and I was planning to join him after the trick-or-treaters were done. I waited around until 8:30 giving out candy. I still had a large amount left, which I was planning to share with Joseph. I took the candy bowl into the kitchen and put it on the counter, and I went to my room to get ready for the party. It was at our other friend's house, which was around a 20-minute bus ride away. As soon as I got out of the shower, I heard the doorbell ring. I thought it was too late for trick-or-treaters, but I was more than willing to give some kid their last for the night, so I walked over and opened it. Standing on my porch was what looked to be a grown man in some kind of costume. He seemed to be either a ghost or a mummy, or something in between. He had a sheet over most of him, with small pieces of cloth seemingly tied around his arms and legs. I wasn't sure exactly what he was going for, but that was what I saw. He was about 5'5", so he could have been 14 or 13, I guess. I couldn't tell for sure. He said trick or treat, but in a strange voice, like he was imitating a robot voice. It made it hard to tell if he was a grown-up or not. I was creeped out, but I didn't want to upset him, so I told him to wait, and then I went to go get the candy. I tried to shut the door, but when I did, the guy stuck his foot in, blocking me from closing it. I tried to look at his face to see if he was joking, but all I could see was the fabric of this strange costume. Not wanting to risk it, I kicked his foot out from the door and closed it, and locked it right away. The guy turned around and walked off after that. I watched out the window as he disappeared down the street. Thinking it was a bad joke, I went to my room to finish getting ready for the party. While I was in my room, I heard a loud crash from the front of my house. It was the sound of glass shattering. I burst out of my room into the living room to find that my front window was broken. Just then, the other window smashed and a large rock rolled up near my feet. I looked out and saw two guys standing in front of my place. One of them was the weird ghost mummy from before. The other guy was wearing a ninja mask and all black clothes. I called the police right away, and the next time I looked out, the two men were gone. The police came a few minutes later, but not soon enough to catch them. I told them everything I knew about what happened that night, and they told me they would investigate. That wouldn't help though, because I never found out who they were. It wouldn't have been hard for them to rip off their costumes and blend in with everyone else. What I still wonder about it is if they were really kids, or if they were adults doing things like that. I guess it's scarier if they were grown, because they could do more harm. I didn't know all my neighbors at the time, but now I do, and I don't think any of them matches the description of those guys. They must have come in from somewhere else. Me and my friends went trick-or-treating when we were younger. It was a long time ago, but I think we were in 7th grade, making us around 13 or 14. For the first time, we were allowed to go out without any parents, and we were all excited. Not that it would make such a big difference, it's just that it made us feel a little more grown up. We didn't have any desire to get into trouble or anything like that. The night was, as always, about candy, and we wanted to get as much of it as we could. It was like a competition in my neighborhood, and everyone would always exaggerate about how much they got. Since we were a little older, and we had been many times before, we knew the neighborhood really well. It consisted of one main street, called Brock Street, with many cul-de-sacs splitting off of it. My house was on one of them, and my friends lived nearby. To get to any other area, you would have to go down a busier street with mostly businesses, and not very many houses. It was a waste of time, so we usually stayed in our area. I went with my two friends Chris and Phil, and we met at my house to start. After hitting all the houses on my street, we moved on to the next section. We were making really good time, and it wasn't long before we had hit all the houses in our small neighborhood. There was a lot of time left, so I suggested that we go down the busier street to find some more houses. As we walked down the narrow sidewalk, we noticed there were no other trick-or-treaters around. The houses out there were not decorated like the others in our neighborhood either. We tried a few doorbells, but we didn't get any answers. It was starting to look like a lost cause. We might have come all that way and wasted our last bit of time. The three of us kept walking, and eventually we noticed it was getting pretty dark. Chris mentioned that he had to be home pretty soon, so we decided to turn around. After taking 5 or 10 steps back towards our neighborhood, a car slowed beside us. It was a newer-looking sedan, and it was dark blue in color. A single man sat in the driver's seat, and there was nobody else in the car. We stopped, thinking it was just somebody asking for directions or something. Instead, the man said that my mom sent him to come pick us up. That made no sense, because I knew she would never do that. I told the guy thanks, but said that we could walk. Right as soon as I said that, the guy sped away. My friends and I looked at each other, and after a few awkward seconds, I said, "What was that?" They both shrugged and said they didn't know. We continued walking, and went to our separate houses. When I got home, I told my dad about the guy in the car. He completely freaked out. That was when I realized that it was serious. The cops interviewed me for a good half hour. After that, they went to talk to Chris and Phil as well. Because of what happened afterwards, we figured the guy was some kind of creep trying to pick up kids on Halloween. If I had to guess, I'd say that he thought we were younger than we were. That would explain why he bailed as soon as he heard my voice. I guess with our costumes, it would have been hard to tell if we were on the older side. His lie seemed really obvious to me, but I wonder if it would have worked on some younger kids. I guess we'll never know, because fortunately, our encounter with that guy was the only one that I'm aware of, and no missing kids were reported that night. I lived in a small house by myself when this happened. It was a few years ago on Halloween, and I've since moved out to a bigger place. This place had 2 bedrooms, and it was in a somewhat rough neighborhood. It was the kind of place where you keep your doors locked at all times, even when you're home. I never had a problem with muggings or anything like that, but there were some break-ins occasionally. Not the worst place in the world, but far from an ideal suburb. I didn't mind though, because it was close to downtown and several public transit routes. Like I said, this happened on Halloween, and when I lived there, I would usually stay home to give out candy to the 5 or 10 kids who would come to my door. It was hardly worth it, but Halloween was always my favorite holiday when I was younger, and I wanted the neighborhood kids to have that experience. I finished work at 5 as usual, and went home to get ready for the trick-or-treaters. After I had some dinner, I turned on the TV and put on a scary movie while I waited. Eventually, a few trick-or-treaters came. I knew most of them from around the neighborhood and from other years, so it was about what I was expecting. When it began to get late, I thought the night was over, so I went back to my living room. That was when the doorbell rang one last time. I turned around and grabbed my candy bowl to answer it. When I opened the door, there was a little boy standing on my porch, but he was alone. This kid must have been 8 years old at the most, judging by his size. He was wearing some kind of a monster costume with a full mask, so I wasn't sure about his age. He was young though. I put a handful of candy into his bag, and I looked around to see if he had a parent. That was when I saw a man standing on the other side of the street watching. He was standing next to a dark SUV, just peering at us. The SUV had a red ball on the antenna and fancy silver trim on the side doors. Before I had a chance to say anything, the boy turned around and ran to the man. I saw them get into the SUV, but then I turned away before I could see if they drove off or not. Most parents would come right up to the door with kids that age, but maybe he was trying to teach his son to be confident or something. I didn't know, so I let it go and went back to my movie. My eyelids became heavy as I stared at the TV screen, but I started to hear noises from the back of my house. It sounded like people talking. Judging by where it was coming from, the people would have had to be on my property, so I went to check it out. When I got there was nobody to be seen. Thinking it was my imagination, I was about to go to bed, but first I decided to check the front part of my street. When I looked out, I saw that dark SUV from before. It was sitting out there, but it was a little farther down the road than it was before. In any case, I went upstairs to brush my teeth and then go to bed. When I was in the bathroom, I heard a window smash. Knowing it was a break-in, I ran to my room to get my phone. When I was in there, I closed my door and held it shut with my body. I called 911 and told them to hurry, and then I focused on keeping the door closed. I could hear at least 2 men walking around downstairs. Minutes later, the police burst in. I was pretty sure from what I heard that the robbers were still there. It sounded like they were being arrested. After another few minutes, I felt like it was safe to come out, so I did. The officers were still there collecting evidence. It turned out that the guys broke a small window at the back of my house, and then used that to unlock a door. I found out later that it was in fact the man in the dark SUV that I saw before. It seemed that he had used his son on Halloween in order to scope out potential burglary victims. I was the unlucky one that time. The most disturbing part about that story is that while the break-in was happening, the young boy who I gave candy to earlier was sitting in the SUV alone, waiting for the robbery to finish. Someone's getting nominated for Father of the Year.